This is Justice Warriors, a podcast where we think about things that are right and wrong in our world and how Christian ideas can help us respond to them. We prefer hard questions over easy answers, and we'd love you to join us in our ramblings. Listen in and contact us using the links in the show notes. Hello and welcome to Justice Warriors episode 38. My name's Andy and as usual I'm joined by Leah. Say hi, Leah.
Hi there.
And Jörg. Say hi, Jörg.
Hello.
And I've done it in the right order so no one is discombobulated. This week we've been circling a lot, I think, in a lot of our podcasts and in our conversations in the real world around the topic of the church. And we feel like we want to address it, and there's probably a lot of ways of addressing it, and we'd like to talk to some other people, interview some people, get some perspectives. But we thought we'd start off with just, maybe this whole episode is just a What Are My Worries episode, I don't know, but basically talking about how we're feeling about church, how do we do church, what is church for? And we've given the preliminary title for this episode, What is Church For? So we're just going to talk around church and see where we get to, and hopefully that will inform some of the interviews and things we do, and try and figure out a little bit, is there any point us all meeting up in a building, if any of us do anyway. So we haven't got any homework. We didn't have any homework because we seem to have completely given up on that. But hey, at least we're recording an episode, so, be grateful. So I'll go straight into what are your worries? And let's start with Jörg. What are your worries, Jörg?
Oh dear. Well, a lot of what you said, I don't always know what it's for. Especially post-pandemic, it seems like sometimes a strangely virtual space. We have learned to meet in different ways, and you kind of... the flow of people hasn't necessarily come back, and I'm not so sure that people know why they would. I've recently listened to a podcast on Nomad, and not the most recent one that we were just talking about in our prep, but a different one where basically the argument is being made. People realized in the pandemic that they didn't miss it, that they actually were looking for a reason to not go to church, and then they didn't really want to come back. And I sometimes wonder if we are in that space as a society, as churches, and what that then means. Is there a chance in here? Can we reinvent church in any way? It was a really interesting way of taking stock. Like, what does it even mean to be in church? Mm-hmm. Can I just listen to something on my ears, which I do quite a lot when I commute? Is that also the same thing? Am I not getting spiritually uplifted? So why am I going to this building? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think, it's more of an existential crisis about church than exceeding worries, I suppose. And
that, that's the question. There is also like, are we a wider thing than just meeting at that one time? And what is that? And
I have the sense there's a societal. I mean, it has been going on for a long time, right? Church attendance down and so on, but the pandemic has somehow sharpened that. Mm-hmm, this sort of rhythm and this sort of, at least within certain circles, that you normally go to church every Sunday or every other Sunday and try and make it work. There's an interesting cut in there, and are we doing enough to reassess whether that Sunday meeting is necessary, whether it's what it is for, B, how the online world is actually changing church, with sort of podcasts, YouTube, the fact that we constantly have two things going on in our minds. And I think from that vantage point, church is actually a good thing to be there and calm down, but it almost feels like it's becoming more of a countercultural thing that has no current home at the moment. Like, people can always go for monastic things and so on, but like going for that Sunday space, it needs a rethink, maybe. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm. It's interesting because I used to go to church because that was where God spoke to me. I had this definite sense. I remember when I was hunting for a church when I went to university. I remember the one that I settled at was the one where I felt that God spoke to me. And I think that was the same when I moved to London as well. And so that would very much be like my initial focus. But now I feel like I can get, and it takes still like you still got to make yourself do it, but I can make that connection with God and hear from God and hear things that challenge me or inspire me or make me think just by listening to a podcast or reading a book.
Yeah.
So that reason for going to church has kind of gone for me.
I thought you were going to say, but now God doesn't speak to you. But no, that wasn't it at all.
just in different places.
That speaks to me.
Is that
Although I was telling you about God really speaking to me at church the other week, wasn't I? That's more of a rarity nowadays, to be honest.
So was that your worry, Leah, or do you have a different worry?
My worry is that the world at large lacks community spaces. Those spaces that cause people to come together who wouldn't necessarily choose each other as friends. And my worry is that if people drift away from church, we sort of lose yet another kind of haphazard, non-organised, non-interest group or class or to my mind, at its best, church cuts through a whole slew of divisions, and if we lose that really worries me.
And you're worried that we are losing it.
I fear that we. Well, I think it's been the problem is it's been an ongoing process of church becoming less like that. So church has become less like you just go to your local community church and more like you choose your brand of church and you drive to it.
Right.
So church has become less of what I've described, but also my worry with St. John's is that, which is actually that kind of church that does have a pretty good mix of all kinds of different people, that as the numbers haven't come back particularly after COVID, and that we are losing something that's really vital to our place, our locality.
Right. Well, my worries, possibly as usual, are all completely wrapped up with my own problems. So, I've pretty much always hated going to church. I find it incredibly uncomfortable, and this is from age as early as I can remember. And I'm not really sure why. I think often it's because the possibility that I might encounter God is a terrifying one, and then there's a whole load of social awkwardness piled on top of that. And that the possibility that I might encounter God being terrifying is basically because I have this internalized picture of God as this really, really horrible person. So that's like a personal problem of mine. But now that's wrapped up. Sorry?
The foot.
Yeah.
From an earlier episode.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. The Monty Python foot. Yeah. But now that's wrapped up in the fact that the times when I see that horrible God is when I'm reminded of my earlier faith in my life, which was an evangelical faith. So whenever I hear anything that sounds evangelical, I immediately just see the foot above me, and that sometimes makes church very painful. And so sometimes that makes me want to walk away from it. And I recently stopped being the leader of our church home group. And walking away from that was weird, because there's a sense of not being required to do that every week, being sort of nice, but there's a real discomfort in me of help where I don't know whether it's just guilt about not living up to what a Christian's supposed to be, or whether it's where is my community? So obviously you do have some need for it. And then so lots of, all that sounded very negative. And then on last Sunday I went to church and felt really like I was supposed to be there in some sense. And that's left me much more thinking, no, there's something in this. But I just don't know what or how. What it is.
Those who died are justified for wearing the badge. They're the chosen ones. They're justified. Those that died, they're the chosen whites.
We've unpacked very different facets of church in just this set of worries. Like, I guess what I was thinking about is sort of, is there even a spiritual place for church, or what does that mean? Like, Leah, you were talking about the sort of the community being fractured, and Andy, you were thinking about what does it mean for the individual to be there. And I was just thinking, like, how much easier would it be if we lived in a time and place, and of course that's highly a very broad brush view of history, but like, where we all certainly believe that everybody in the community, you don't want to mess up with God, you better be in church, you got actual forgiveness of what you've done wrong through taking communion on Sunday, and you need to be buried in this place. And so everybody gets drawn to that. And now we live in this extremely fragmented world where there's loads of spiritualities around and none. And people get their spiritualities in different places, whether it's, not thinking about it at all, or a podcast or about whatever, or being out in nature. We're in a world where we are actually able to organize communities around interest a lot more than what we would be able to do in a village 300 years ago, where you had to live with the same people. And we are much more aware of our own sort of emotional needs. So doesn't that exacerbate the point? Like, what is it even for? In a way that is our society not become too large for this idea of a Jewish gathering of a village?
You think we're post-church?
Well, I don't want to be, because I think, but we haven't. If we're not asking those kind of questions, we're not gonna think about it. We'll just keep spinning off a model that worked 300 years ago, when you thought, if I'm not here, if I'm not having communion, that thought I had last week, if I were to die from whatever disease is next week, I'm going to be in hell. We're not living in that world anymore.
Yeah, but like, I was going to just like step in and say, I can't let that go past without saying that that's also quite a bad vision, and I think you've just done that for
exactly.
me. So.
Of course. But that's.
I don't think he was holding it out as like a model for.
No, exactly. But like that's what kept the thing alive.
Yeah.
Like
and
we have the sort of
there,
idealistic stories in the Acts of the Apostles, which fall apart in chapter 5 and chapter 6 already, where it has a very natural way of talking about that quarrels emerge right away, and people cheat and people don't distribute well. But other than that idealistic vision, wherever you look, it was this sort of, a sort of spiritually or even politically mandated gathering that we've inherited. So no wonder people go for it because they feel they should.
But we go to a church which has a wide variety of people going to it, and does lots of things in the community. So, isn't it already succeeding in being the kind of thing it should be? Like, obviously not everyone is there. I think you're talking about a situation where, like, everyone's there, so you can it's some kind of common...
Well, everyone has some kind of connection with it, at least. Not everyone's there every Sunday, but this idea that that's the center... Like, I mean, in a small town... that would have been the center of the community. And you'd go there and think, you'd have the rich people in there sort of skewed off pews, and you could talk about their clothes, and the poor people sit in the back. And of course there were all these splits, but at least there was a sense of like everybody was here. At least Christmas and Easter and the big festivals.
So we don't have that, but we do have like a cross-section of society and a church that is very involved in society and isn't just about one meeting once on Sunday.
Right.
So what if you were to take a church like St. John's, and there are, hundreds of not dissimilar ones around the country? What if we were to take it and say, what goes on out in the community is absolutely brilliant, and that is church. And we said, let's stop gathering together on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Would that be right? Could that work, or would the whole thing just fall apart?
I think that's exactly the thing I was after. Not saying that's the solution, but like that's exactly the problem I'm after. Like there was a time when the people inside the pews reflected more or less everybody outside. Now, like you were describing, Leah, in the sort of voluntary world, it is a subset of people who have a particular kind of belief, maybe, or who feel they should at least honor that belief because they've inherited from their childhood or something, and therefore they're in church. But it's not, by any stretch of the imagination, a representative sample of our town that you'll find at graduations, or that you'll find at, in the pub or in the coffee bars.
So imagine, let's continue this imagining thing, right? Imagine that we were a charity, and we did work in our town. Any kind of organisation requires a shared vision. So one of the things that church services give us is an opportunity for I guess I was going to say for people to speak, right? Because obviously the sermons are a way of like building a shared vision, and that is true. But then I started thinking, well, what are the songs for? And I think, songs also build a shared sense of purpose, right?
It's like the Scouts; they all sing songs.
Do they?
They sit around a campfire.
Gosh, no wonder I never went.
But that has kind of something of a similar effect, that you go there year after year to the same camp or whatever, and the songs because you've been there before, and there's a sense of shared culture there.
Why do we derive so much joy from the repetition of something like that, but then feel like resentful towards the repetition of? Maybe we don't. Sometimes I feel resentful towards the repetition of saying the same stuff at church.
I think the problem is, if I'm not careful, I spend so much of the service, as in the sermon and the songs, thinking, well, I don't agree with that, and I don't agree with that bit, and I don't agree with that bit, and I'm really struggling with that bit, and I wish they wouldn't sing that wretched line about win our nation back, and and so by the end of it, I'm having this internal battle in my head, which is, I want to be part of this, but actually being here and listening to this and singing these songs is making me feel less a part of it. And I think I was saying the other week that I was in church a few weeks ago, and I had exactly that feeling, and it kind of got to a point in my head where I thought, I'm just going to go and walk out and sit outside. And I sat outside on the kind of stone that's sort of almost like a seat, but is actually also part of the church. And I was looking at those 3 or 4 great big yew trees that have been there for probably hundreds of years. And I did have this almost mystical kind of experience of sort of almost sensing all the people who'd come and gone into our church over the hundreds of years that it's been standing, and all the things that they had right, and all the things that they maybe had wrong, and all the things that they loved, and all the things that they hated, and all the things that they'd said that had blessed one another, and all the things that they'd fallen out over, and all the things that had been part of God doing God's work in this town, and all the things that had hindered it. And I kind of was just able to kind of exhale and go, well, there we go. The church still stands. But God is still at work.
Yeah.
Good stuff still goes on. And que sera, sera, in terms of how I might feel, or whether I'm right or wrong, or whether the person who wrote that annoying song is right or wrong. And it was actually deeply humbling and moving, and I went back inside in quite a different headspace. But that doesn't happen to me every week.
I love that story on so many levels, because, like, on the one hand, it's funny, you kind of you sit in that space of a consumer, right? And that's how we've learned to read church, and I often fall into that as well. You kind of sit there and you think, nah, that's not me. That's not me. That's also not me. That's them. And you're individualizing yourself in that very place because you want to be different from the mass. You don't believe, like, critical capacity is in being different, and, you get your individuality, subjecthood out of differentiating yourself. And then actually your experience was in realizing, maybe in my reading of it, that's why I like thinking through this for myself. First of all, it's the community that draws you in, and the celebration of the multitude of people who got things right and wrong. And then also realizing, maybe, and I think about this a lot in relation to my work, where people sometimes tend to be self-inflated, you're just occupying a place. There will be other people sitting on that stone looking at the yew trees and the graves around them, and saying, and at that point, you will just be one of the little links in that chain of tradition, which also is a very, sorry, talking about death again, Andy, very early in the episode, sorry.
How have you done that? Well, I didn't mention the gravestones. I mentioned the church step and the yew trees, and you brought in the gravestones.
I can't stop thinking about the fact that, there's just a piece of being part of that history and of dissolution and into something greater. So that's part of what church should do to us. That it's that celebration community. I mean, there's some theories about religion that work the same way as well. Like Durkheim says that in essence, society celebrates itself in religion. It's like a mirror. It celebrates its communal whole together. And to some extent, I think that's right. There's a sense in which good religion draws you out of your own individual self and into a broader community and a humble place. But that's not always what I hear in church, and that's not always the songs we sing, because it's become not necessarily in our church, and not necessarily every Sunday, but like in some of the ways it's become about the individual, not about the community.
Yeah, I think what I find really helpful about that story, Leah, is that I really struggle with, like, I need everyone to be right. And then if I go to church and I feel like, no, that's wrong, it really troubles me. And it's partly because of a theology that has deeply hurt me, right? But by stepping out of the need for everything to be either right or wrong, and really for everything to be right, and just looking at just being included in this thing, which contains aspects of both right and wrong. I mean, A, that helps me feel included, but B, it's much healthier. And my desire for us to always be right will just lead to yet another person or church who are wrong in a really confident way, right?
Yeah, and you can hear it in some of the stuff that you can listen to, that is the deconstruction process or the progressive church or whatever you want to call it. That it feels like it's it will so easily slip into becoming another thing that has a load of stuff right and a load of stuff wrong, but it'll just be different stuff.
So something that we talked about a bit in our pre-talk, and I want to talk about a bit more, is the sense that we as a church are a group of people who are on a mission to do something to our community.
Is that right?
This is what I feel is wrong, right? That we have this sense of, like, the reason we get together on Sunday is to be re-energized so that we can go out and do this thing to everyone else. And where this really came to a head for me was there was a sermon, I don't know, a couple of years ago by a lovely lady who does lots of wonderful things in the community and doesn't in any way embody the philosophy that I saw, but she used an analogy which is from some materials from a Christian organisation, and it was a picture of some kind of brightly coloured dots surrounded by grey dots, and the analogy was, we're like the brightly coloured dots who've were charged with Christianity, and then we go out into the world and spread the joy. And then, the dots all change colour and they all become brightly coloured, right? And this analogy absolutely devastated me, because it for me it represents a kind of toxic idea about the world. That is not in any way what the person who was preaching meant, but it's an idea about the world that I have encountered, which is that people who don't have a certain set of beliefs basically have no value and nothing to offer, and they need to be brought into the group of brightly coloured dots, and then they'll have insights about God or be capable of doing good things even. And that really, really disturbs me, that idea, because what I would like, how I do see the world, is that all of those grey dots are not grey dots, they're beautiful multicoloured dots with so much to offer me to learn about God from them and to learn about life and everything else. And I somehow want to figure out how we can do church in a way that isn't doing it to other people because we've got it all right.
And yet in a different way, this is the story of Jesus' mission, but the grey dots aren't grey because they are not saved in that sort of very evangelical sense, because they haven't said yes to Jesus. They are broken in their relationships, or they are broken in the rejection they've received. They don't have a home. They're lonely.
Yeah, but so are we.
Yes, but it's sort of like an inclusive gathering of people into a different kind of community where, everybody's colourful and different, and you celebrate that difference and you learn from it. Absolutely. Yeah. And you let them challenge, and you challenge them as well. I mean, Jesus does that, right? He says some very provocative things, and then is himself provoked back and said, well, yes, Jesus, you called me you called me a dog, but even the dogs get the crumbs off the table, so you better do something for me now. This is not okay to reject me like this.
That's a very difficult passage to understand.
Yeah, it is a very difficult, this scriptural passage about Jesus seemingly rejecting somebody with some very racist remarks, and then but being challenged in that racism in a world where that would normally go unchallenged, and you just retreat back. And so that kind of vision to say, well, what is the brokenness? And I think our diagnosis of brokenness is often just way too spiritualized. Not necessarily in lots of the things that the church does, but we were talking about this in the pre-talk, and what we think is the core of church, which then comes back to the sort of conversion message that we were alluding to.
Yeah. So I've done a little bit of work with Christians Against Poverty, and my understanding of their philosophy as an organisation is that they essentially do their good works in order to convert people. they do some wonderfully good works, and I'm probably completely unfairly characterizing them. But if that is their philosophy, then I really disagree with it, because I feel like good works are inherently good.
But yeah, coming back to this, like some of their videos are really moving because they speak of people who don't have a home, whose only home is, spiritually or socially, emotionally, and who, through the hard times they've fallen on, realize there's more to life than their worries around debt, and find a community that supports them holistically, right? So in a way, there's different ways of reading this.
There are, and like to some extent, like you don't have to get all the ideas right in order to get some glimpse of the kingdom of God, right? And they're doing a huge amount of that stuff. That's right, in a really inclusive way. Sorry, Leah.
I was going to say, I wonder what proportion of regular church-going Christians still have this idea that if you die without saying the Jesus prayer or saying that you believe, that you are going to this place called hell. Because if that's genuinely your belief, then actually you really ought to get on with preaching the gospel, and nothing else kind of really matters apart from that. I wonder how much it is that story is. It's so old and it's so simple and it's so oft repeated in Sunday school and as a from a child. Just wonder how many people still, even if they don't explicitly believe it anymore, just have it kind of on a loop in the back of their mind, and that is actually then a really destructive story for anything other than just making sure people get converted. I wonder how much of that is the problem, and then you hear everything through that lens, because that's the base story that Jesus came to save the sinners and to get us to heaven. It's like a flipping Boris Johnson political slogan, isn't it? It's so flipping simple.
3 million for the NHS,
yeah, 3 million for the NHS, get Brexit done, all sorts of other bonkers nonsense, take back control.
I did want to talk about him. Thanks for bringing him up.
Oh, come on. It's all
worse than death.
I have to mention him.
Worse than death.
Worse than death. Sorry, you bring up death, I bring up Boris. But it's... Humans latch on to simple ideas, concepts and stories, and often they're just right at the grounding of what we think. And
like, it doesn't work anymore.
I suppose...
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I don't hear it preached. I don't hear it explicitly said. But I just wonder if more should be done from the front of church to actually counter it.
I did hear it preached.
Just so pernicious.
At a church a few months ago at our church.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, it doesn't work. We've lost. So we're in danger of losing the broader Jesus message under that sort of shortened one, because, as we said before, what do young people think about climate change, war? We are collectively marching toward disaster in so many different ways. Yeah, I'm still completely worried about what's going on in Ukraine. That there's absolutely no path to peace with nuclear weapons abounding. That CO2 emissions are going up, that, all of this kind of stuff, the populism seems to be, and it's just, but all of those kind of questions that generates, or how do I even, within a society that values success, that takes up work takes up so much of your time, social media that kind of plays on us, questions around ChatGPT and AI, there's so many huge questions barreling down at us as humanity, and we have no answers. We don't even understand the question, because we're living in this 19th century idea of the good citizen that needs to turn to Jesus in order to be free from their sins and become indeed a good citizen. And it's just like there's a theological reformation that needs to happen, like you were saying, Leah, right from from what we preach and think about, so that actually what we say on Sunday is not the repeat of the Sunday school stuff and the worries and the guilt, but actually connects with the kinds of conversations we're then having with colleagues about Boris on Monday.
Yeah.
But so I think that talks about some of the damage that it does to like what we do, right? That we focus on making sure people's ideas are right rather than like say serving them or being served by them or whatever. But I think there's another thing as well, which is that idea that some people are going to be kind of thrown away, I think leaches into life, or can leach into life, where you think, well, this person might be one of those people who has no value, and that's not up to me, it's sort of up to God. And I like profoundly disagree with that viewpoint on life. Like, I think that everyone has total value, and so I'm worried that having tried to stop being keen on who's right and who's wrong and just being all about ideas, I'm now latching onto but this idea is a really bad one, and it's also one that is like part of the theology of my church. The idea that people get thrown away, by God.
Well, and the idea that that's the thing that ultimately matters, not the fact that people are thrown away today.
Yeah.
Everywhere. That's it. Yeah, we've kind of made everything so virtual about the end of life.
Right, yeah, ultra spiritualized, yeah.
That we're no longer seeing the death, the hell indeed, that's happening right in front of our eyes.
Right.
And that indeed people are going to get thrown away in the jaws of climate change. Yeah. And are already. And those questions are real. They're out there. But who picks them up? The stand-up comedians, the better politicians. And churches also, they integrate them into their language. But it's not core somehow in most evangelical circles.
No. Yeah, so are we saying that there's a limit to our to our tolerance of all kind of different ideas and ways of being in church, because this one feels so ultimately destructive of actually really being church?
What do you think unites us? What can we get behind that is right?
I mean, for one, I think it is important to have a space to think about these questions. I mean, there's a lovely idealism in Christianity that says it's going to be okay. God is the author of history. There's things you need to do, but you are capable of doing that if you look to your weakness, not to your strength. If you take your cross upon yourself, if you follow in the path of Jesus and you hope for God. And that weakness wins in the end. That it's not about looking out for yourself. I mean, there's so many good ethical messages, perhaps, but even beyond that, that sort of decentering experience that you can have in church, like you were sharing with us, Leah. And even in the moments, sometimes when it goes well for me, like I can shut out some of the music that I don't feel comfortable with and have one of those meditative spaces where my phone is not in front of me, where I can't escape. And then it's also a spiritual experience that guides you toward a better life, because you get a better grounding that takes you away from all the things that have been running through your head and the false priorities you. And so I do think it's important to have that kind of space that grounds you spiritually, that is reflective of a community. I just think we really need a good overhaul that is a lot more expansive of that, and maybe is also different formats, that is more centered around doubt than answers. Sometimes lament. People do go to church for funerals, sorry to bring up death again, but also And also for celebration, for baptisms, for, so that all the kind of stuff that really makes up life, people want to be in a place that sort of generates meaning and ideas about meaning. But some of the sort of day-to-day grind of Sunday after Sunday doesn't do enough to integrate that.
I do think that message of hope in the face of impending disaster is something that we sorely need, and that we can find not only within Christianity in some theoretical way, but I feel like we can find it in our church. We could somehow get some of that. It's not totally out of reach.
Yeah, I mean, I feel massively for these young people who are really concerned about climate change, because without some kind of faith and hope, the future looks really, really bleak, and that must be really hard at a younger age. It's not pleasant for us to think about it, but I would happily say I've had some amazing years living on Earth, and other than missing my family or children, I think I've had a pretty incredible time, and it doesn't owe me much. But when you're in your teens and 20s, that's not how you should be feeling. Life should be ahead of you, and to be looking down the barrel of what we're looking down is horrible. And so I just think it does offer something. I just wish we were getting that message out there more, that God is ultimately good, and what's that Julian of Norwich thing? All will be well. It might not be individually easy or pleasant, but it will be well. And I don't even know what that means, but there is some.
That's the beauty of that.
There is some hope there.
I haven't read the book. It's the Julian of Norwich book, which I think you bought me. Is sitting on my bookshelf. It's next after the book I'm reading. But that thing of all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well. And she repeats it. Part of that, this was someone who really understood suffering and had kind of no hope in a way. Part of that is just a complete nonsensicalness of just saying, yep, there is something bigger than what I can see that I fully trust.
But it also links back to your story, Leah, because, pestilence, wars, hunger, worries were all part of those stories that you saw. So, church can also be that reassuring place, without getting too traditionalist or anything, to say, well, there's a much broader history here of this place saw amazing stories of human suffering and human kindness. And we're not promised more than that. But people were looking out for each other. There are other stories that shine through. And again, in that sense of there's a different kingdom coming. That sort of idealistic vision that you can see in the little things. And that too is a place where church can be really well, no matter what was preached. Sometimes it's just, like another example you shared just before, just sometimes a conversation you've had with somebody, or a happy thought, or even sometimes I experience that where I'm sitting in a service and I'm handicapped, I'm a theologian, I listen for the wrong things. And so therefore there's always different things running through my head and so on. And I might not agree with X, Y, Z, but it still oddly calms me down, and I get out of there and think there's something. It was good to be here because I needed some time out. And those are little glimpses of a different kind of future that is not centered around the experience of last week.
Yeah. I was reflecting actually that most of the, in quotes, spiritual experiences I've had recently have been in church, fairly often because I'm like reacting to something that's happening in church, but still, like, yeah, it still is a place where I engage with the divine.
Yeah, or you make a space for it in some way just by going, right?
Yeah.
A lot of it is just showing up.
So the other question that we had on our notes that we wrote was, what can we bring? So if there's something in this thing of this hope in the face of disaster, what can we, and it doesn't have to be individualistic, but what can we bring, do you think, Leah?
I think we can bring showing up. We can bring saying that we think being part of this community is important. And whether that means showing up to a service or showing up to a community event, I think it's important to try and make time. I'm telling myself as much as anything because I squeeze it out of my week too easily. Because until you show up to things, you don't know what the random happenstance is of who you're going to sit next to or who you're going to chat to over coffee or... Yeah, that so much of life is managed and organised, and you choose to make an appointment to go and have coffee with X or have so-and-so around for dinner, but it's a random space for chance encounters, and to bring yourself to that is important, I think.
My wife, we were talking to each other after service last week, and she said she was just in the service and just looked round and saw all these people that we have connections with, and that in some sense that felt like that was the right place to be, because connections don't stay connected without being tended, and sometimes turning up somewhere turns into like part of a connection building. Okay, so we can do turning up. That doesn't mean necessarily turning up.
That was a bit of a low bar, wasn't
Sunday.
it? Just turning up. Turning up and not feeling whingy.
Can we bring some of the world, into our gatherings on Sunday?
I mean, I was thinking about bringing questions, vulnerabilities, doubts. And a lot of the sort of fascination with Jesus when he was walking around, at least as the Gospels tell us a story, is that you could just say, well, what the hell is going on? Why are we under these Romans? How am I supposed to live? Are the Pharisees right or the Sadducees right about the resurrection? I don't know. all those things, like, what am I going to do with the experience I had last week, or with the feelings that are running through my head? Is this something I can unpack here? And I'm not for once advocating this sort of, I don't think that's a pretty idea, the sort of very emotional and everybody just kind of pours out their tears. That would be too cringy. I wouldn't want to be there where everybody just kind of, it's a German expression, lets their trousers down and shows the truth. It gets ugly. But in a way that it still is real, that it's okay to not come away with answers. It's okay to sit there with a struggle. That is the space to sit there with a struggle. Like, for me, maybe one of the reasons it's often nature where I can go to struggle is because it's quiet. Nobody talks at me all the time. Like, I don't have to listen and decipher and critique and think about what somebody else just said, but I can just kind of work through something. So something that's maybe less taught and a bit more vulnerable. That's what I appreciate about some sermons, when people actually share the struggles, don't want to give the answers, and it feels more real. when it comes out of a real question. I mean, that's one of the reasons when I'm preparing a sermon, I always want to find the place that irritates me in the text, because I want it to come out of a deep, like, I don't get it. And I want more of that in church, sharing with one another the fact that we don't have an answer, right, but that we don't want to fall in line and just go shopping.
Yeah.
There's got to be more. And I'm wrestling with this more, and I don't know what that means. Whatever it is, the relationship I thought was beautiful is breaking down, or kids, or midlife crisis, this or that, or indeed larger questions like climate change. Without there being a trite answer, saying we're going to have to sit with that here.
And maybe sometimes prayer has the wrong role in this, because all those things are brought up in church, but it's always like, we'll go for prayer and get them fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or so sort of a liturgical space in prayer for it, right? So that's when we're going to do Ukraine, we're going to do in the intercession.
Yeah, but that's the time when we're trying to... You don't bring that stuff and just sit with it so much. It's more, come and see if we can fix it.
All right, and just ask God to fix it.
Not all that helpful. Oh yeah, see if God can fix it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I was thinking, is that just a desire for other people to be different? But it's not, is it? What we're saying is we need to bring our vulnerability as far as we can, and it's not easy. Because it requires trust, it's not a one-way thing, being vulnerable. But it's something that we and our listeners can do, is to just make, move in that direction a bit. Bring our real selves into church. It sounds so trite. Like this was something that I felt like I was talking about when I was 10. We shouldn't bring our fake happy faces to church. We bring our real selves, type thing. Actually, I genuinely remember
confessing what you did.
The only sermon I've ever preached was when I was about 16. I did a children's talk in a children's service, and my sermon illustration was I had an orange which has a very thick skin, and I said we shouldn't be coming in with our thick skins. We should be being real with each other.
You dry out pretty quickly as an orange when you do that.
And you end up with a very thin skin.
So it sounds very trite, right? Like we should be being real with each other, blah, blah, blah. But there is some action we can take, right? In that when we're there at church, either leading in some way or just being there, we can engage a bit and bring in some of we're really thinking about. And we can bring more of ourselves, not just on Sunday, but through all our stuff. Sorry, Leah.
No, I was just saying, I feel like you can bring your problems, but it's just that you can't bring your problems week after week after week and them not be solved.
I think that's the problem. We are expecting Jesus to make things well.
Yeah.
Not explicitly, but there's this idea that church is the place that, we talked about this earlier, that shines into the world, that provides the solutions to the world around us. And that has a way of drowning out all the difficult stuff. Perhaps, and not consciously, and not in our church, but that's where some of that comes from, where the people who don't quite fit get left outside, whose life doesn't match the story.
Yeah, because if you're a grey dot and you get turned pink, if you go grey again, what's going on? It doesn't fit the story.
It's not.
But it's all right. You've convinced me that we're all grey dots.
Soon.
I thought we were colourful dots. What happened there?
Oh, you're right. We're all very, very, very brightly coloured.
We're colourful dots until we go grey.
But we're all broken. And continuously so.
There's a thing about honesty And the fact that it happens elsewhere, again, when comedians talk or something like that, and sort of the sort of fracturedness of life and the sort of funny bits, the things that don't quite work out, that they tend to be talked more about in other stages. So I like I said, I love the Christian idealism, but that can lead us to want to tell a too smooth story that becomes preachy, rather than saying like, man, we believe in a physical man who rose from death. That's outrageous. It's outlandish.
Yeah, and what do you do about my aunt who's had, chronic ME for the last 10 years and hardly goes out of the house,
and then
despite countless amounts of prayer, what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And then we turn that
How
story,
do those two
that outrageous
things
story,
marry
into
up?
a template that we then preach others.
Yeah. Yeah, we just fall into this trap of wanting to package things up nicely too much, I think.
So Leah, does this just block us? Like I was saying, what can we do? Are you just saying, I can't really do anything because that traps us?
No, you've lost me. Say that again.
Yeah, this thing of wanting things to be fixed, so you can have problems, but only for 1 week. Does that basically prevent us from doing what we were saying we can do, which is to bring vulnerability in?
No, I think we have to just keep bringing it week after week,
right?
And be those people who, allow others to do that as well.
Because if you think about the Jesus story, it's a story that goes exactly the way that every other story goes. If you stick your head out too far, if you reach too high, you're going to get your head cut off. You're going to be brought down. He gets killed. It goes the way all the other revolutions went. And then the resurrection bit never leads to the overthrow of Rome. It's only a glimpse. It's a thing. It's a body that comes through walls, that looks like Jesus, feels like Jesus, has the marks of Jesus, and yet sometimes you don't recognize him when you're on the road to Emmaus. So that resurrected Christ is a fleeting presence. It's a vision that makes you look at difficulty differently, that makes you look at hardship differently. There's another story of God that will break through in this. I don't know how, I don't know when, and it's okay to sit by the cross, because I got to trust in the Spirit of God that something's going to break through. And that was the vision of the church. And then again, that story of the church went the way of the cross in many ways, right? Corruption settles in, it becomes the state entity. And yet, for some weird reason, that idealism, that Jesus that walks through walls, that stuff that never should happen, stayed with us. And that's amazing. That's a really amazing thing. But every time we kill it, every time we turn it into the simple story, come to Jesus, you got to believe he rose like this. And exactly as it says in the Bible, there's no doubt about it, because otherwise, it was full of doubt. The Bible stories about resurrections are full of doubt. So why don't we come into church with this fleeting presence? I need something. I need something to speak to me right here, right now. And that may be out on the tombstones, or in that nice stone by the church rather than tombstones, Leah. Or maybe it may be in rebelling against something else, but there's a fleeting presence of something that keeps carrying me on, rather than the simple story, rather than the, believe X and this week will go well. Just get a refill of the nature of the miraculous. Sorry, I'm rambling on, but
no, it's good.
Let's bring our doubt and find our inexplicable hope.
Exactly, yeah. That all shall be well, weird hope that, yeah.
Doesn't make any sense.
That we don't quite understand.
But we're still here.
Yeah.
And if we can offer that out to the world, not go out and say, you need to come in and believe this stuff.
Absolutely.
We go out holding this weird, slightly fragile thing and say, here, you might find this is helpful.
Yeah.
Or you might not.
Imagine if the Archbishop was on the radio saying, yeah, things are bad. It doesn't make any sense that I've got hope. But it seems like I have.
Yeah.
And by the way, you look beautiful today. Then turn to the other and say, like, have this encounter of God. Like, that not just this, oh yeah, bring your worries. This is what church is about because I'm here to save you. Because, a lot of the community things can turn into that as well, that it becomes not a celebration of a different story, but yet another point of service. We did this in our pre-discussion, Leah, you were saying to me, well, why don't you then go to community fridge or church cafe or something like that and make that your church? And I said to you something to the tune of, but then where am I getting my spiritual fix? And that was exactly wrong, because we look at these things as, yeah, but that's me helping others, rather than celebrating a moment of spirit appearing when we share in one another's lives.
Yeah.
All right. I think I'm going to draw us to a close there. I want to end with, I've got a thing that I'm going to read in a sec, but I want to end by saying how beautiful all the people in our home church are. And if we've ever been whinging and moaning about our church, it's only because we want to wrestle with this stuff, and it's not because we don't think you're amazing, beautiful people. Okay, so in the spirit of bringing our doubts and questions into church, and we talked a bit about the songs. A few weeks ago in church, I was listening to a song that I didn't agree with, I had a problem with. So I got out my phone and I wrote a little thing, which is like the song I would like to sing instead, kind of thing. So if you'll indulge me, our final reading will be that. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's called Deaf Song.
Deaf or death?
Deaf, not death. Again,
No,
I was just going to say,
death.
Andy.
You have to imagine that someone set this to music and made it rhyme and stuff, okay? But I haven't done that. We who sing these words are not separate from the sins of our people. We stand wearing clothes made by hungry children. We have broken our world and sing ourselves deaf to its moan. We laid our barbed wire across the beaches to stop the broken crawling out of the sea. We climbed inside a bubble to deaden the outsider's voice. We, not someone else, have pulled the walls down on ourselves. Will you have mercy on us? Why would you? If there is mercy, let it be for us to change. If we survive the fire, we want what ember is left to be something of you.
Wow. Yikes. I want to sing that song.
That's what I'd like to be singing. Might be a bit depressing.
You could make a perky tune.
Find something Hillsongy to...
All right, thank you very much, Leah. Thank you very much, Jörg.
No, thanks, guys.
Our next thing will be an interview with someone, probably from our church, talking more about all this stuff. What is church and how do we do it? Thanks a lot. See you next time.
You've been listening to Justice Warriors. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also follow us on social media by searching for Justice Warriors, where warrior is spelt like someone who worries about things. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating, since that helps other people find us. Also, please tell your friends about us in real life. We'd love to hear from you. To get in touch, use the email address in the show notes or contact us via the social media links. Thanks for listening.
Told ya. kid.